everybody. Welcome to this is
the temporary studio.
This is the temporary studio.
The Cincinnati Podcast temporary studio.
Yes,
that doesn't make
temporary
sense.
version.
Okay.
We're the Cincinnati Podcast Studio. My name is Josh Lewis.
And I'm Brian.
And you need to say your last name.
I'm Brian Erickson.
There
Hi.
you go.
Hi.
And we did not practice that part. But yeah, so we wanted to record this video. It's not a podcast yet, but we wanted to record this video to share just some things that you may not know about us. So what the studio is, why video podcasting is really, really important, like why we're in this and why we believe in it so much. So what we're going to do is we're first going to share a little bit of our story and how the Cincinnati podcast got started.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, Brian, I'm going to have you start, and then I'm going to interject my parts.
Okay, deal. Yeah. So it all kind of started. I started my own video production agency about a little over a year ago, and I was recognizing as I was doing this that there needs to be some sort of space that people can record video podcasts. Because when I was on my feed, I was finding podcasts all over the place. Like my shorts feed on YouTube was filled with it all the time. And so I was realizing, what if the common person in Cincinnati could have access to something like this? Like, what if a business owner could have access to something like this? Because it was such a genius way to be able to record content, right? You get so many different pieces of media out of it. Yes. And so I'm just like, and we'll talk about that more. But so I was thinking about this, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. And then a buddy of mine I was talking with, he ends up wanting to build a podcast space inside of his building that he has. And I was like, oh, well, what if I took over it? What if I made it my space, but then you can use it or whatever, that sort of thing. And so I also looked and I was like, oh, it's a really boring name, but Cincinnati Podcast Studio exists as a URL. Like, why don't I buy that?
Yes.
And make this into something and kind of pursue it. And it was going to be kind of a side venture off of my company, Renegade Reels. Yep. But I was like, I don't know, this could also be its own thing. So I made a post on social media about this and said, hey, coming soon, the Cincinnati Podcast Studio. And then you commented.
So this is where I have to tell my part. So there's all of Brian's lead up. And in the meantime, so right now I work at my church as the director of communications. And I had been wanting to I had been dabbling in my own side business, devising good, and, similar things to Brian, video production, but there's some other things that I was doing, and man, I was podcasting was my favorite piece of what I was doing. I was doing a lot of virtual stuff, so not so much the in-person studio feel, but I had produced some podcasts that were in person. Yep. But man, the more and more I thought about it, I was like, I think I really want to pursue video podcasting and helping organizations with video podcasting. And then joke.
Well, you were thinking about this. You were thinking about this at the same time, and you're like, what if Devising Good became a online remote recording podcasting setup? So, yes, that was kind of the direction I was heading. I was like, I want to niche down instead of just doing multiple kinds of video production. Yeah. Plus, I knew Brian was doing Renegade Reels. I know so many of the video agencies in the Cincinnati area. Yeah. I'm like, man, I'm not sure I want to compete with that necessarily. What if I did something completely different? Yeah. And so I was going to do, remote virtual video podcasting. I'd produce it. Sometimes I'd host, that kind of thing. Then this guy posts about this on LinkedIn, and I was like, dang it. Oh, no, because, knowing Brian, knowing his skills with production quality, I was like, oh, man, that's going to blow. My whole thing about not wanting to really
be in competition with certain people. It's like, well, this is a thing. So anyways, I decided, you know what? I'm just going to message Brian and see like what's up. Literally not wanting anything more than I just want to see what he's doing, see if there's any differences in what we're pursuing, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. And so you reached out, said, let's grab coffee. And so we go over to meet on the east side, grab some coffee. And while I was driving, I kind of had this weird moment where, like, over that week, it kind of felt like God was, like, giving me all these videos that were popping up in my feed that were talking about co-founders. Like, I had at least 2, maybe 3 videos that popped up, and I was like, oh, right, including Mr. Wonderful himself, Kevin O'Leary. He specifically said that one of his businesses would not have taken off if he had not had a partner.
Yeah.
Like, it literally would have died.
Yeah.
And so I was, like, driving, didn't consult my wife or anything about this, and I was just like, oh, well, what if Josh would be, like, I didn't even think about it before us having coffee. I was just like, oh, what if Josh wants to be a co-founder with me? And so then we start having coffee. 10 minutes into the conversation, you say, I'm planning to leave my job.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, okay.
So that's all.
Yeah, it was great. And so for me, the biggest thing is Renegade Reels has been taking off like crazy. And I didn't have the bandwidth to be able to say I could do this all on my own. Right. So I knew that I needed somebody whose skills complemented mine. Yeah. And it was hilarious how you and I have taken personality tests and we're literally the exact opposite of each other. It's so funny.
Yes.
But it works out so well because you have certain skills that I just don't have, and I've got other skills that you don't have.
Yes.
And so when you look at our website, it literally says creative genius and gets crap done. Like that's our job titles right now. Right. And so it just worked out so good. Like, I asked you then, you wanted to say yes in the moment, I could tell. Yes. But then you're like, okay, I need to talk to my wife. And I was like, oh, wait, yeah, I should have done that too. and then like it was a couple days later and you're like, heck yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
It just felt like what I think between knowing your skill set and then also thinking about like, I just felt like this would give such legitimacy to some of the stuff I was wanting to do, having a physical space.
Yeah.
And I think, man, it's really funny. I've been seeing all these posts on LinkedIn. Like, there's a lot of good that has come from people learning to do things remotely. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's very helpful. But even this interaction, like, one thing we didn't say is like we've known each other for like 24 years.
I was like 7, I think, when we first met. Like,
right.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And so like we've known each other for a long time, but like even just doing this versus virtually, it just gives a different feel.
Absolutely.
It's an in-person conversation. And
the big thing though that was about this whole idea is I didn't want to be a podcast studio, an audio podcast studio.
Right.
Like this is not what Cincinnati Podcast Studio is about.
No.
Because you can go to any co-hatch, you can go to any co-working space and they're going to have a studio, like a podcast studio room.
Right.
And that's not what we want to do.
No.
Like what we really want to do with this is we wanted to create this content machine that created high quality content that uses the medium of podcasts.
Right.
So like, I know we're kind of jumping to the next piece here,
That's
but
great.
like the big thing for me is like, we're creating a space where people can come in, record. They can do remote recording, but at least they're in a high-quality studio starting it.
Yes.
And using those recordings to not only produce a audio podcast, also produce a video podcast, and also produce a ton of marketing content that can then be shipped across social media, YouTube. Yes. I mean, Pinterest even now has video.
Right.
So all those separate spaces, and you're even messaging me earlier today about like LinkedIn now has shorts,
right?
Like of all these things.
I know some of you, it's been going on for a while, but like I looked it up afterwards. But like yesterday, literally, I'm going through, and I'm like, I have a video tab now.
Yeah.
So this is perfect.
Yes, absolutely. So the big thing that we're really trying to recognize is that there is a massive gap inside of social media for businesses to be able to create consistent, repeatable content to market their companies.
Right.
So when we try to, like when I was thinking about the work that I was doing in Renegade Reels, it was so project-based. Yeah. Everything that we were doing was a single project at a time that may have like multiplication factors where you can use that content multiple different ways, that sort of thing. Sure. But it was one project.
Right.
This is the ability to do things weekly or even more than weekly, where you're getting, I think we counted at some point out of it, something like 12 pieces of content from one 1 hour podcast.
Right.
You get video podcast, you get an audio podcast, you get you get up to like 7 short form pieces that you can put on Reels and on TikTok and all those other places, and clips. Yep. You can get like 3 to 5 clips out of that sort of thing. So you can get massive amounts of content at a price that really isn't, like, honestly, from what I'm looking around the place, like if you go to a actual studio in town that is all about video production, not podcast production, they will charge you through the roof for some sort of this piece of content.
Yes.
But like you can create this content at a weekly schedule that can literally fill your entire content calendar if you wanted.
Like you could literally have something to post every day.
Every single day.
By recording a 1 hour podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. And like, we have some clients that like, people are getting ready. Studio's not ready yet, but we have some people who are getting ready to record monthly, right?
Yep.
So there's some people who will do that. But like, where I think this really shines is if you are wanting to grow an audience, if you are trying to get in front of people with the discovery algorithms and all these different things, if you're wanting to kind of, I would say, endear people to your organization, who you are, like this is the best way to do it because of how much content this creates.
Well, tell them about your example for like what endearing looks like.
Yeah. So, okay.
While Siri's talking to you there for some reason.
My goodness, this guy. All right. So, again, I work at a church currently, and one of the things I am always trying to figure out is how do churches communicate really, really well.
Yeah.
And there is a podcast called The Pro Church Tool Show. And I was like, okay, cool. And it was literally all about all forms of church communication.
Yeah.
Social media, stage announcements, yada, yada. I find out that these guys, it's a podcast for a business called Nucleus. And Nucleus makes church website platforms. And it's like super simple and all these different things. And I've been listening to their podcast probably for, I would say, close to 7 years.
Yeah.
And I've actually tried multiple times to use Nucleus's product because Brady Shearer and Alex Mills did such a great job of reeling me in and telling me they built trust and authority because they were showing me they know how to communicate well.
Yeah.
They know how to cut through the fluff, what's not helpful right now, what trends are happening, like all these different things. And because I liked them essentially so much, and they've answered, this is another great thing, if you have a video podcast, they've answered my questions that I've sent in on their podcast.
That's awesome.
I'm like, man, I really, really want to work with these guys. And I tried twice. It didn't work out because our church was the wrong size and our needs are different, blah, blah, blah. But like, that just goes to show you, because of their podcast, I tried twice to work with them because I just liked them.
Yeah.
They had my trust. The things they valued, I value. And so through their podcast, and again, it's a long-term thing. I had listened to their podcast probably a few years before I had really looked into working with them at all. But, I mean, they have an audience like me because of their podcast. And I think, and this is a business. This is a for-profit business. And so I think this is a long-term strategy for how to cultivate like fans and build trust with people. So I think that is what makes me so excited about podcasts. I love how, I'm a fan of certain kinds of AI. I'm usually an early an early adopter in a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is sometimes we can just lose the humanity of businesses and like, what am I actually connecting to?
Yeah.
And we're all people, and I love getting to showcase people.
Yeah. Well, and that's also another big thing that's in the marketing world right now. The kind of the buzzword that I'm hearing inside of marketing circles. I was at a conference a couple months ago for the American Marketing Association, and they were talking about the key word that's kind of happening right now is personalization.
Yeah.
So it's both personalization for the person that's watching, like you, but also for the businesses. People want to know people behind the business.
Yes.
They want to be able to understand that it's not just some corporation. They want to know the people. Yes. And it's almost like, in a way, you build a sense of celebrity around yourself. Yeah. Like if you had a phone call with those guys from Pro Church.
Yep. Pro Church
show, that show, like you would feel like you knew them already.
Right.
Like,
yes.
And you feel like, oh, this is cool. I actually get to talk with them. Like even the people who hosted our website, like who run that platform, we kind of knew them.
Yes.
Like ahead of time. And we're like, this is kind of cool. We've seen their stuff.
Yeah.
So like that same sort of effect is what we're trying to build with your business is we're trying to create this form of, sometimes I don't like the word celebrity, but like this understanding where the person sees you, hears your voice, knows more about you, so that when they walk into a conversation with you, they already are kind of sold on you.
Yeah.
At least you as a person.
Exactly.
And then they're trying to see if the tools will work that you're trying to sell, or whatever the service or the product is that you're trying to sell.
Yes.
So it's a huge piece of how do you sell and multiply yourself well.
Yeah.
I think is another way, because I always talk about, like, when I make videos for other companies, I say this is like a salesman that works 24/7 on your website,
right?
And you never have to do anything past making the video,
right?
Like that's exactly what all this content does.
Yes,
you get to have cool conversations with whoever it is that you bring onto your podcast.
Yeah,
and then that lives on your website, on your socials, and it just works as a salesman.
Yes,
because they get to know you.
Yes, and if you're putting those shorts and stuff on these social media platforms that have the discovery algorithms, it's actually being pushed to people that it should be shown to.
Oh, and I love talking about that because, like, I've asked you this question. When is the last time, like, viewer, when is the last time that you clicked on a random podcast on your podcast app?
Yep.
And just listened?
I personally literally have never done that.
Never done that.
And I'm a hardcore podcast listener.
Oh, I know. I think I did it once, maybe twice, and only once it worked out.
Right.
Like, and so for me, I was like, oh, shoot, no one does this.
Yeah.
But there are algorithms out there that social media companies and platforms have specifically built for discoverability.
Yes.
And so why not take advantage of those discoverability algorithms using that short form content to help people find your podcast and want to be fans of yours? Because I say this also to people all the time. It is in social media's best interest to promote video.
Yes.
Because it increases the amount of time on their website, on their app, on their whatever, on their platform. So that means that they can serve more ads.
Exactly.
So it is in their best interest to boost your content, your video content, to a discoverable place so that they actually make more money.
And if you are creating a video podcast, like let's just take the long form version, and you put it on YouTube, YouTube is the #2 search engine.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so this is a way to get your podcast discovered. This goes back a little bit to what you were saying, Brian, about not just audio podcast. If you work with us, you also get the audio version.
Yep.
It will go up on Apple Podcasts and, and Spotify and things, except we'd recommend put the video version on Spotify now.
Yes.
But, like, it is so important to have the video version because of having that #2 search engine. So the more you have, especially since they're transcribing everything you say.
Yes.
That becomes a search term. That becomes content that is now searchable.
If you go on Google right now and you search something, usually the third or fourth result is a bunch of videos from YouTube.
At least, if not the top stuff. So, it's so important. I mean, we literally could go on and on and on about why it is so important. And I think it's actually a huge miss to not do a video podcast. I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
you know, I've asked several times on social media, like, okay, if you have an audio only podcast, what's keeping you from going video?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, it's the space, right?
Yep.
A lot of times it's the time it takes to edit, you know, that is a valid thing. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times it's their space, you know, they're working out of their house or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these are maybe like small businesses and things, but like, I think that's part of why we're like, yeah. And that's why we have a studio, because that way you can come and have something that looks great.
Yeah.
And looks professional.
Yep.
We can do a few things that can tailor it to maybe you, and then like you're off to the races. Yeah. There's literally nothing. We want to make it so nothing holds you back from having a video podcast, from having that content creation machine.
Yep. Absolutely.
All you have to do is show up and talk.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the big thing about podcasting in general is it can be DIY'd.
Yes, it can.
But we're not. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to take you, instead of like 20% of the way where you can DIY it and make it sound okay.
Yep.
Because so many podcasts nowadays are just people recording on their webcam.
Right.
And it is very hard to listen to and very hard to watch.
Yes.
But like what we want to do is we want to take you 80% of the way.
Yeah.
Where we offer you the space, we offer you the editing, we offer you the graphics, the high quality, all that stuff.
Yes.
We want to offer that all to you, where all you have to do is the 20% of what is your story.
Yes.
And even we do offer yearly planning services too,
so
on top of that.
If you're like, I know I want to do something, I'm ready to, I just don't know how, talk with us. I would love to walk you through, like, how do you plan out this content? How do you figure out what you should say and how to say it and all these different things? So yeah, we totally would help you even with that piece. Yeah. Again, we want to take everything that is getting in your way so you can just show up and talk. Bring your guest, bring whoever your co-host is, and have a conversation.
Yeah. And I think, let's speak real quick. I think we didn't mention this earlier in our story, but let's speak to our credentials a little bit of why this is important to us. Because, like, from my side of things, I worked at one of the largest churches in the nation as their video technical director, and I got to create content all over the world for hundreds of thousands of people. It was really amazing. Got to work with some of the gear that I was drooling over in college and got to really create this awesome stuff. And then after I worked at that church, I then got to work in a ad agency, basically. It was a video production studio, and working with them to create ads for multi-billion-dollar brands. And I really saw this cool niche of like, oh, but there's a space for this video podcasting thing. And so I know how to create really engaging video content, and I know how to create really interesting storylines and make it look really, really good. But then from the other side of things, you come from more the creative side of space.
Yeah. Well, and so I used to work at an explainer video company.
Like the premier one in Cincinnati.
Right. And it was a huge experience. I was primarily, at that point, in the, project manager space. I dipped my toes into, some creative direction and different things like that. I worked on some live action projects, a lot of animation projects, and then kind of moving into the role I'm in now, I kind of touch everything. Mm-hmm. And so really what the explainer video company and then even my role right now is, as I've been thinking about things, like, yes, I definitely, this is where Brian's expertise comes in, because I really want high quality content. Mm-hmm. But what I truly want is to create understanding and provoke action. Mm-hmm. And because, being understood is kind of like core to, counseling has told me is very core to who I am. And I think that's why I like video podcasting, is because you can, over time, show more and more of your personality, of your brand, of all these different things that in a, yeah, it gets a little intimidating if you're not used to it, speaking in front of cameras and there's lights and things. But especially if you're like talking and having a conversation, there's things that people like, they can just talk on and on and on and on about.
Yeah.
And we want to be a space for people to just talk about what makes your brand, your thing awesome, and just go to town on it. And what are the misconceptions that your audience has? All those different things. So yeah, I love helping people think through the content piece and making sure that it's not just a pretty thing.
Well, that's a big part of what Devising Good does too,
Right.
is you're kind of like a creative concepting
Yes.
agency,
Right.
basically.
Right.
And you're bringing those skills to the podcast studio to say like, hey, what does a year's worth of content look like?
Yes.
And how can we creatively plan all this stuff out? Like I think that's going to be super valuable for our people as they come into the organization.
Yeah, I love it. So that's kind of us. You spoke a little bit to this before, but what it takes to actually start a podcast.
Yeah.
Again, you can DIY it, and so we're gonna like talk through like all the different steps it kind of takes. And so, what's the first concept here is the idea.
Yeah.
The idea. What is the idea of a podcast?
Yeah. Well, I think you kind of touched on it earlier, which is really interesting. Like the idea of having some sort of podcast that follows a meta narrative of your industry.
Right.
So like, you like to refer to the Pro Church Tools podcast, which talks about marketing, even though they're a website building company,
right?
But marketing for churches. So like, how can you create a podcast that is really interesting to your audience that makes them want to learn more, and then also say in the end, oh, this could be something that I could find interesting.
Right.
But if they're struggling with the idea, but you really want to use podcasting as a medium, you can help them with that.
Yes. And I think one of the big, like, as I think about what makes a good podcast, usually whatever that meta narrative is, like a lot of times there's a bad guy. Like,
oh yeah.
What is the change your organization wants to see in the world? Mm-hmm. So for Pro Church Tools, they really wanted to see bad communication go away. Yeah. They wanted to equip pastors, people in the church, to communicate better so that there wasn't this hindrance, so that people could actually hear the message of Jesus and not like get confused about this thing or that thing. And so, like who is your bad guy? What's the thing that you want to see change in the world? Yeah. What's the thing that you can talk for days about? Yeah. Like those sorts of things. Figure out what is that thing that your audience would want to hear. What's going to provide value for them? Yep. Because you have to be, a podcast cannot be just about you. Yeah. It has to be talking about the things that your audience cares about if you want them to keep listening.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's that classic Donald Miller hero's journey style thing. Like, you make your customer the hero, not yourself. Yep. You are the guide that gets them to the place that the hero wants to be.
Yes.
So the same way with the podcast, you are trying to share useful and listenable information to these people who are on the other side of the screen, other side of the speakers, whatever, and help them change their life and and guide them to a whole nother level.
Yes.
And so the next idea is like the setup, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like, kind of like, where are all the places that your podcast is actually going to live? Mm-hmm. So you have to set up Apple Podcasts. You have to set up Spotify for podcasters. You have to set up your YouTube channel. You know, there's
like a bajillion podcasting sites. So like tons of those things you have to set up everywhere.
Exactly. And so there's quite a few things, and you need the graphics for it. You need the descriptions. You know, like there's a lot of different things.
Oh, and maybe like the skills of like editing and all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. Like being able to like work Canva or Adobe Express or whatever, and figuring out those things. If you can have the best podcast ever, but if it's not set up and put if it's not put in front of people, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If they're not going to see it, all this work is going to go to waste. So it's super important.
I know so many people that literally run into that issue where they'll record several episodes of a podcast. They'll never even post it. And then they stop.
Right.
Of course they stopped because they never even posted it.
Yes. Yes.
The same thing happens with our video content we make for people all the time. We're like, are you going to post that stuff?
Where did it go?
You just paid money for this.
Yes.
Why aren't you going to post it?
Yes.
Oh, man, that can be the worst sometimes.
It is. It is. All right, number 3 is the scheduling. So
idea, setup, scheduling. Third one. Okay.
Yes. So schedule, that's kind of more along the lines of having a spot in your calendar. Mm-hmm. Why is that important?
Well, I think the big thing that I kind of compare it to is an accountability partner.
Yeah.
If this is something that you view as something valuable to your organization, like making consistent content, making a podcast, making short form content, if that is valuable to reaching your audience and growing your business, oftentimes we just get stuck in the weeds.
Yeah.
I mean, we understand this. We're starting this organization right now. We get stuck in the weeds all the time. And we have to be certain that we are on top of all the things that we need to do.
Yeah.
And it feels like everything's urgent.
Right.
But what this creates is it says, hey, there's a consistent time on your calendar where you're going to come in, have a guest, tell a story, whatever it is, and you will create that content because, number one, you paid for it, and number two, it's already there on your calendar, and you know that you have to create something.
Yes.
So I think the biggest thing for us is we're both available, and they're booked for you, but we actually help you by saying, hey, you spent the time, you spent the money.
Right.
You need to do this because it will actually grow your business.
Yes. And I don't want to compare this too much to actual relationships because it is slightly different, but there is an element to where you have a relationship with your audience, right? Mm-hmm. And consistently showing up is the thing that will build trust.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if you think about other relationships, the consistent ones is really where you get the most trust. Mm-hmm. And so that's super important.
So then we have the idea, we have the setup, we have scheduling. Now let's talk about the equipment. I'll talk about this one.
Yes.
This is my alley. I love this. So the big thing really is that we have spent thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars on all the equipment that we have in our space. And we know that video podcasts are generally cost prohibitive to somebody who's trying to do them themselves.
Right.
Because usually that requires a full-time staffer whose only job is to manage and build a studio, buy all the gear, and then spend all the time editing and creating all this content. But because of the experience that you and I have, we can do this way, way, way faster than most other people can. And so when you walk into our space, you come in with professional microphones, with high-quality 4K footage being recorded on 3 cinema cameras.
Right.
You get high-quality audio. You get experienced engineers who know what they've been doing. We've been doing, both of us have been working for over a decade each in these fields. And so we understand how to make and produce the best quality content in a way that would probably take a while for most organizations to really overcome that barrier to begin with.
Yes.
You can start at really high quality and then just work on your story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's the part that's so helpful is just it. We're really trying to move everything out of the way so you can focus on what's important to you. Because I think there's this false narrative, I don't know, out there that everybody's a content creator, so therefore you also have to be very skilled at video editing, very skilled at X, Y, and Z, right? And it's that. How about you be awesome at your thing, and we can help you.
Exactly.
And I think that's why it's the equipment we're using is because Brian is really picky. No, is because we think there's something about honoring your audience. Mm-hmm. One of the things, so Brian talked about this earlier, how some people using their webcam or maybe not a great microphone or the framing's weird or the lighting's weird or blah, blah, blah. And I think it's so helpful to do everything you can to honor your audience in giving them something that is visually pleasing and that is audibly pleasing. So that way all they have to do is focus on what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
it does your brand a disservice if you have crappy quality.
Exactly.
And I mean, that was actually our next point. We're already talking about it, the production.
Yes.
But like, that is key. Like, you need to represent your brand well.
Right.
And a lot of times that DIY stage does not represent it well.
Right.
And so on top of all this really nice equipment, you get the high production quality that represents your brand well, or maybe even elevates your brand in a way that you haven't been able to do before.
Right. Exactly. And then the last piece is distribution.
Oh, that's really tough. Yeah.
That, again, it's important to have everything set up, but then you really need to go through and figure out, okay, how am I going to actually make sure that the things we've recorded, the things that we have get posted in the right ways, in the right frequency, yada, yada. And so, it's just important. Make sure that what you have created gets seen in these different places.
Yeah. So we've talked about how the podcast studio generally works, but like, let's talk a little bit more about, and I think this is probably the last little bit that we've got here, but what is it that we actually physically provide people?
Yeah.
Like, what do they walk away from a recording session with? Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So when you walk into our studio, you're going to be working with us, and one of the things we really want to provide is one of our values is a good hang.
I love that value. It's so good.
We want you to be so excited to be there. We want you to look forward to being there. We want you to be excited to bring people there.
Yeah. And we want to have to kick you out.
Right.
Like,
yes.
Hey, we got another client coming. Sorry.
Right.
We loved hanging out with you, but got to go.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
And so that's a part of this experience that we're going to be working hard to always be improving on. But what you actually get at the end of the day, so you get an up to 60 minute video podcast. So that's going to be a long form episode.
Yep.
So you'll get the audio version to post where needed, and then you get the full length video version. Along with that, you also get the short form content. So that's the vertical videos that you can post on TikTok, Instagram, all the places, right?
Depending upon the length of the podcast, you can get up to 7 of those out of that.
It's easier to get 7 if we have an hour.
Yes.
It will likely be less if we have less than an hour.
Yes.
But the 45 minute to hour range is the sweet spot. So that's kind of like our base package. We'll also give you thumbnails and things like that. But we have another package where we also give you clips. So if you think about the long form version as the full video, or the full length feature film, and then the shorts as the teasers, these are just like the clips from the movie. So it's
they're
almost
like complete thoughts.
Yeah, if you think about it, like I've recommended to people using this, like say you have a support desk or a help desk or your sales team or something like that. You're going back and forth with people, and you're like, hey, you know what? We just got off the phone. You were talking about this thing in our podcast. We actually specifically talked about this, and you're able to take that 2 to 5 minute clip, that complete thought, and give it to them. And it's your podcast. So one, you're representing your brand with high quality video content, but also it gives them how you guys have talked about this before. And it's a way you don't have to like re-explain it, but you can just take that clip. I'm going to send it to you because this has always been valuable when we share it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's count that. So that's a video podcast, an audio podcast, up to 7 shorts. Okay, that's 9.
Yes.
9.
9.
And then 3 to 5 clips could be pulled out of these things too. So you got somewhere in the range of like, what, 12 to 14 pieces of content that you can get out of. We need to make it like a nice round number, like 15 pieces of content
right.
out of a single hour-long episode.
Yeah.
Like, that is massively valuable. That is huge.
Yes. And again, it's, video podcasting is a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
We really try to take away all the barriers, but this is probably, from my perspective, from all the video I've created, I'm like, this is the best way to create this much content in terms of your time and your money.
Absolutely.
Like, I have never seen a better system for this.
Yeah. I mean, I know a ton of people, like, I've literally seen people online who use the format of podcasting only to create short form.
Right. I have
It's like, and I was like, oh, that's hilarious. Like, I've watched a producer talk and say, like, okay, we just want to make sure we get a clip about this, and this. Yeah. So I'm just going to ask you a question, pretending like you're on a podcast.
Right.
And we're like, well, that's awesome. But also, let's just make the podcast.
Yes.
Like, why not have the long form?
Exactly.
Because I think the other way to look at it, too, is like the shorts are the top of a marketing funnel.
Yep.
It's your chance for people to be able to just discover.
Exactly.
And then the clips are like that middle ground.
Yep.
That's partway down your marketing funnel, and you're really just starting to get people engaged. They're starting to learn more. Yeah. They're trying to probably answer a question.
Right.
Is what's going on there.
Yep.
And then the bottom of your funnel is this moment of like, hey, you're listening to the podcast. Because that's where you get true fans.
Yes.
That's where you get really interested people who are saying like, oh, I might actually want to buy their service or product.
Right.
And then from that point on, it's just having a conversation with that person, and you can probably sell something to them.
Yes.
After that.
I was listening to, actually, I just messaged him today, but Gary Vee posted today about his book, I think it's The Attention Economy or something like that. And, he's always saying that attention, or day trading attention, that was it.
Oh, okay. And
he's always talking about how really one of the most valuable things people can give you is their attention.
Absolutely.
And this format of creating content is again, such an amazing way of giving people something to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
And so I would just consider that as you're thinking about, like, is this for us? Mm-hmm. Think about that. If you're wanting attention, if you're wanting to build trust, if you're wanting to create true fans, what are you doing that's worth paying attention to?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing I really want. As a studio, we want to give you all really high quality value, right? Mm-hmm. Because we want you to give your audience value.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Anyways.
So, we're the Cincinnati Podcast Studio.
Yeah.
We're really excited to be able to invite you into our space. One of the big things that we are going to be doing is we're going to be doing studio tours. So, if you ever are interested in just learning more about what it looks like to be in the studio, to get the feel for it, to understand where we're at, just come down, reach out to us. Our information is on our website. Contact us. We would love to have you come experience what it's like. Maybe even have you on some of the podcasts we'll be hosting. So that'll be really fun. And then get really into the weeds about what it would look like for your business to actually succeed in this space. Because we honestly believe that this is a powerful, powerful tool for your organization to grow. Yeah. And so if we can just provide this space for you and allow you guys to build a following and an audience in a way that you've never been able to do before, then hit us up. We'd love to connect with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
See ya.